to be a lawyer. I know this because I have evidence. When I was in second grade, I made this paper flower. And every petal had to answer a different question. You know, how many siblings do you have? What neighborhood did you grow up in? And so on. But my favorite petal was the one where I had to answer this question. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I don't remember writing what I wrote, but with the benefit of hindsight, it kind of makes sense. My second grade self had written, I want to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. And every step I took from elementary school to college was subconsciously and I guess simultaneously calculatedly geared towards getting into law school and becoming a civil rights attorney. I was told time and time again throughout college, internships, that law school wasn't worth it. Too much time, too much debt, which is true. But each person who told me that was a lawyer themselves. Many weren't practicing law in the traditional sense, but they were reaping the rewards of that degree. To me, a JD, a Juris Doctorate, meant power. It meant being equipped with 2 letters that somehow could transform me from civilian into advocate. 2 letters that would let me represent folks who couldn't represent themselves, or who weren't getting justice in a system that was not built for people of color, not built for people who couldn't read or speak English fluently, or simply couldn't afford to navigate the justice system. 2 letters that would let me give voice to my community, to communities oppressed for no other reason than blind ignorance. I grew up in the Sikh community. Sikhism is my religious faith. And growing up in that community meant growing up under the shadows of 9/11, which meant growing up under the shadows of ignorance towards turban-wearing Sikhs, men in my community who were seen as terrorists. To me, my dad was my dad, my brother, my brother. So why were people looking at my family with such disgust? Why was my family having to plaster American flags all over our house? So I got into law school, and I was really proud, and I was really excited that I was on my way to helping other people. And it was around this time that I was also immersed in an incredibly rewarding and difficult experience. I had tried out for my campus's production of vagina monologues. Hey! Does everyone here know what a monologue is? Okay, good. You don't? It is when one person talks for an extended period of time, kind of like what I'm doing right now. Yeah. And Vagina Monologues is a show about the tragic, hilarious, and beautiful moments of being woman. And at UC Berkeley, that didn't mean just putting on a show for a couple of nights. It meant 5 months of 5-hour meetings every other Sunday where a group of women explored what it means to be just that. Women, feminine, femme. I indulged for the first time in learning about the myriad of ways that individuals identify with gender, sexual orientation, and their foundational identities. I questioned my own sexuality. I was pushed outside my comfort zone of understanding gender. But most of all, I was awed at the space that we had created for ourselves to tell our own stories. And I fell in love with storytelling, participating sometimes, but mostly listening. So instead of attending law school right away, I deferred. I wanted to explore storytelling. I wanted to explore what justice could mean in an unconventional way. I turned again to the Sikh community. I thought about how I'd seen my community's narrative always played out on media through other people's talking points as a reactive measure. I wanted my community to take agency over their own story, like in Vagina Monologues where women could just be. I wanted Sikhs to tell their own stories, and I knew I could make that space. So I created Sikh Monologues. After graduating college, I packed my bags, I traveled around the country for 4 months, and I interviewed Sikhs across America in 15 different cities. And I gathered so many stories, some of which had never seen the light of day, about Sikhs going through depression, Sikhs who had experienced sexual violence, that things that are taboo in our community to talk about, and they were telling me. And I took these raw, candid narratives, and I wrote short vignettes based on those interviews. And then I recruited community members, people I grew up with, my brother, my aunts, and I somehow convinced them to memorize a bunch of lines to stay on stage, under a spotlight, and they did. And I did this in 6 different cities with different casts every time, and each time, there was a point where the words on the page were no longer someone else's story. It became that actor's story. Because inevitably, the actor found themselves in the page. And that's what it means to produce something that is by and for the people. This was by and for the Sikh community. This was by and for immigrant communities, for diaspora communities. And this, for me, was another kind of justice. I, and the folks that trusted me as interviewees, as actors, had taken agency over our own narrative. And I have never felt more me than backstage at a Sikh monologue show. And I continued to produce that show throughout law school. It helped me deal with the constant imposter syndrome I felt in the career that I chose. It helped me deal with the death of my grandfather and get through a lot of phases of anxiety. And then I graduated. And now I am that civil rights attorney that I always wanted to be. And I intentionally retired Sikh monologues to focus on that dream. And it's left a void. And I'm slowly making my way back to finding my voice through creative channels. But I realized something. On the good days, being a lawyer isn't all that different than being a storyteller. And justice can mean many things. I wanted to become a lawyer to be an advocate, which in a distilled sense means voicing the stories of those who are facing injustice. But it can also mean creating spaces for marginalized communities to talk, grow, and heal. I created Sikh monologues for this reason, to provide a platform for a community that has been the target of racism and prejudice in America. I think my 2nd grade self was a genius. Yeah. She wanted to become a lawyer so she could tell stories in the highest court of law in the country. So maybe I've been a storyteller all along. I just used to call it lawyer. And now I call it writer, activist, organizer. Everyone has a story. We, us, humans, are these finite beings packed with history and trauma and dreams. We have the capacity to import and export emotions multiple times a day, attempting to find balance between all the things stimulating us externally, driving us internally, and exhausting us constantly. I am so impressed at everyday survival. And today, y'all let me share my story, and I really appreciate the space that you've given me. But even more incredible is that today, on International Women's Day, we are celebrating and recognizing so many women who are not only surviving, but thriving. They've chosen to do things, pursue careers, explore passions that are perhaps unconventional, but definitely took a leap of faith. But they're here. We are here. Creating and advocating for ourselves and those we represent. We are thriving, and we are telling our own stories. Thank you.